My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights Podcast. Welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights Podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. And today I'm honored to have Dr. Rebecca Mitchell from Vive Collective with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the show. So, please, we would love to kind of understand as we jump in, your move from traditional medicine path. You went to medical school and ended up turning, at certain points in your career to like a head of product management at one of the most successful digital health companies ever, Livongo. And now you're an investor. So kind of walk us through your non-traditional path.
Sure. And maybe kind of like to reveal the punchline up front, I feel like I was always on a non-traditional path that dipped into traditional and then dipped back out again, if I'm fully transparent about it. But to kind of explain that move maybe from medical school medicine into tech, I have to go back much earlier in my life to explain kind of the medical education, health education I got leading up to that. I grew up in really rural northwestern Wisconsin, and in a context where health really was all about community programs, clinicians that were not necessarily physicians, but providing an enormous amount of the care to the community and running programs. My mom continues to be a registered nurse. Like earliest memories were riding along with her to senior care home visits. My dad worked for the state of Wisconsin his whole career, working with people with mental and physical disabilities, constantly bringing them home to go fishing. Our house was on the lake in Wisconsin, of course, northern Wisconsin, setting off what were probably illegal fireworks even back then. And then kind of prior to medical school, spent a ton of time in global health research, lived in a bunch of different places doing product development and tech transfer into really rural, resource-poor environments, and just a lot of other things that made it so obvious when I started medical school that so much of what impacts health, both kind of the place people are at in their lives and communities are at and what you do about it, is well beyond the allopathic medical model. Mm-hmm. So, went to medical school to learn that critical piece of the puzzle, but realized pretty quickly that I really wanted to play not just within that box of how, allopathic medicine training tees you up to practice and lead that type of medicine. But I wanted to play outside of it, change it. And I think a lot of physicians actually feel that way. And it's one of the reasons that you hear about a lot of them wanting to get more involved in things outside of direct clinical care now. And a lot of people are struggling with how to fit those puzzle pieces together. And I think we're going to talk more about that today. But I realized very, very early on that I deeply appreciated that training, and I continue to use it every day, but it's not how I wanted to spend the majority of my time.
Yeah. And a big complaint we hear in healthcare is that there's all these healthcare companies, but very few of them actually have doctors who work there. So kind of walk us through how you feel your, expertise in medicine helped you not only at, leading product management at Livongo, but really just in your career in general.
Sure. So I would say, first of all, that I agree, with sort of like the framing statement, but would tweak it and say, when I was really first learning how to be a product leader, learned from some really amazing people at Code for America. And what they consistently talked about was needing a team, not just like individuals, but a team that deeply understood the problem plus the possibilities for solving that problem. And I think if you are lacking a clinical expert, note I say clinical expert, not a physician specifically, as part of that team, you're missing out on both the problem and possibility side. So for sure, we need more individuals with the appropriate training and like direct care experience deeply embedded in those teams. But I will say even more than I see that as a gap, I see once you have them embedded on the teams, people lacking kind of the ability for a long time to work effectively together, really as peers, because that is so different than the model that you train in and you work in as a physician. And for people that come more from kind of tech roots, I think they lack the skills and experience to like figure out how to effectively pull those types of individuals in and like use them as an embedded SME.
Great. Walk us through at what point within Livongo's growth curve did you join as VP of product management, and like what did the company look like when you joined, and what did it kind of look like kind of through IPO and then ultimately, merger slash acquisition with Teladoc?
Sure. And I mean, this could be a 3-hour conversation, so certainly
Yeah.
push me on the juiciest pieces you're interested in. One thing I will clarify up front is I wasn't the head of product. Amar Kendale is the head of product
Yep.
CPO for all of Livongo. And then Donna Boyer, once he departed at Teladoc. What I joined to lead was our clinical platform. So really
Mhm.
thinking about how to drive clinical outcomes and cost savings as part of the program experience and capabilities, as well as what the tools were for care teams inside Livongo and then outside Livongo to effectively use. I think I quickly became a double-edged sword for Amar, where I was both annoying but helpful and always wanting to think about the bigger sort of picture. Like, do we have the right products? Are they going to be defensible? Are they really doing what we need for the right people? And so he invited me to build out a team that owned the product lines, where you were thinking about kind of the whole thing.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did, both at Livongo and then Teladoc for their products as well once the merger happened. So with that kind of like clarification, when I joined, I was really lucky, where I had the fortune to join what was already an early rocket ship, where the
Mhm.
people that came before me, as far back as Kim, who I know you had on the podcast earlier,
Yeah.
but the early product leaders, commercial leaders, early executive team had really figured out in the product, like what that repeatable hook was going to be for
Mhm.
people using it, which was the free blood glucose testing strips.
Yeah.
It was a very different time then, where people really were limited and even following basic physician recommendations on how often to check their blood glucose. And then they were completely without any support interpreting that number in
Mhm.
between the visits to the physician. And so, Livongo really figured out very early on that if you could break down that access barrier for self-testing and also
Yeah.
support people in the moment with both what to do next, but also what it meant over time, it
Mhm.
was an incredibly sticky product to keep people within, but it was also something people were really excited to sign up for. Livongo had also figured out our key channel in
Mhm.
employers in channel partnerships with folks like pharmacy benefit managers, CVS, ESI were big partners of ours.
Mhm.
So I joined when that early kind of kernel was there. And
Mhm.
so our job at that point as a team was really thinking about how do you take this early kernel and pull people into working on many of the other things that are really important as part of living better with a chronic condition.
Yeah.
Um, both in the sort of like feature set sense, but also how do you think about reaching more people in other markets? So as we expanded into other markets beyond employers, into health plans, we tested multiple times if we could go back into health systems.
Mhm.
It never quite worked. I think it's a different time now for other companies, which we can talk more about. But also bringing on board other conditions, because of course people living with type 2 diabetes very often have other chronic conditions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for all of us, we are all aging, and we're going to have more advanced conditions over time. So it was really a constant balance of how deep do we go with our existing people working with us, and how much do we spread the model that is to other markets and other kind of clinical needs.
I love that. What changes did you and your teams make to the product from the time you started till, the time you left?
Sure. So, when it was just Livongo, it was a lot of what I was just referring to. We needed to make the product work from an enterprise perspective
Mhm.
for the other market channels we went into, like health plans, different level of expectations and how we
Mhm.
build, how we reported. Um, and both saw that as an opportunity to of course grow the company, but for us on the product team,
Mhm.
one of the really cool cultural things that was really true across Livongo, but especially in the product team, was everybody was there with a deep mission orientation and impact orientation.
Mhm.
So it really was the opportunity to bring the program that was working to as many people as possible as quickly as possible. But that's sort of from a like new market entry perspective. We also tested and did a lot of things within the product to try to work on medication adherence, trying
Mhm.
to support people who also took insulin as part of their plan, built better tools to share information with your kind of care team outside of Livongo, the physicians, so they could quickly look and see what your numbers were outside of their office visits, like any interactions you had with the coaching team. We built a lot of tools to make coaching more effective and more scalable. That was a big draw in the program. And we saw like real causality in the more coaching sessions you had, like the better you did in terms of managing your glucose. And then, of course, we released many additional products in addition to diabetes to help people manage their weight, to help people manage hypertension, prediabetes. And then, really close to the time when we went public and then were acquired, we started working on some more complicated conditions, advanced conditions like chronic kidney disease and heart failure. And, that was both taking what already existed and making them appropriate for those populations and clinical indications, but also really asking, okay, how do we go beyond just information sharing with the rest of the healthcare system to really working in coordination with them? So with CKD, we had a partner that has a whole network of dialysis clinics, at the time at least. And so I was really thinking about how that model came together and you could support people much earlier in their journey with CKD as well as later. And then with heart failure, we started doing a lot of work directly with health systems to catch people at the point of diagnosis and, after they were admitted to help them stay out of the hospital in the future. So it was sort of like growth on all vectors, which made for a very challenging but exciting time, in addition to the extreme, growth of the company over that period.
That's amazing. That's just great functionality you and your team added.
Maybe to answer the second half of your one comment on that and then answer the second half of your question, I do want to acknowledge actually how hard, because we had found such an incredibly strong, sticky thing in just the test strips and self-testing, we had actually created a bit of a problem for ourselves in rolling out all of the other capabilities and feature sets, because you had to pull people off of that primary surface into like the mobile application experience and the coaching experience. And so I just share that because it was an important learning for us that I think people working in digital health, where a single sort of sticky loop is not enough. Like maybe it would be in like a D2C company, or it's sort of you go there to do one or two jobs and it's fine. That's not enough in healthcare. And so you really got to be thinking from early on, if you have people living on one primary surface that can do a certain number of things, how are you going to get them into the environments where they do all of the other things, right, that can fully fulfill your promise to your clients and people working with you in the future?
That's very insightful. It was all of that success was a double-edged sword.
Totally. Everything's always a double-edged sword, I think, is what I'm learning in life.
Yeah, true.
But, post-merger with Teladoc, things really shifted to, a direction that Livongo was already going in. I went on a maternity leave, actually. And when I went on a maternity leave, we were already having conversations with a number of telehealth companies at the time about either merging the companies, acquiring them, or at least doing really deep partnerships, because we saw that to go where we needed to go next in creating more value for our clients and the people working with us, we needed to add like a higher level of sort of physician services and get more vertical in approaching the conditions.
Yeah.
And I came back from maternity leave, and on my first day, Mark called me up and he's like, so we're doing that totally on strategy, but this is how it's being done. We're merging with this gigantic organization. And so the next 2 years were like very hard, but also really fascinating, because it was both like figuring out how to, from an enterprise perspective and team perspective, merge these just like two behemoths, as well as merge in prior acquisitions Teladoc had made that had been kind of left sitting on their own islands technically and people-wise.
Like MyStrength?
What?
Like MyStrength?
MyStrength was acquired by Livongo. So thankfully that was already, a lot of like the integration work had been done.
Oh, you're talking about like Best Doctors and...
Yeah. So I think a thing that a lot of people don't understand about that mega merger is it wasn't just Livongo and Teladoc. It was like Livongo, Teladoc, plus finally merging in a bunch of these prior acquisitions. So it was like significantly more complex than just even bringing those two enterprise vehicles together. So it was both all of the things that are fun and hard about that, but it was also needing to like very, very quickly innovate on like the core model of the programs by bringing in those like physician level capabilities and services and figuring out how to sell all of it all together. Because that was during COVID, the market moved really, really fast. And, it was also the whole premise of the merger itself. So we did a lot of that work, most of that work prior to me leaving.
So we've had double digit guests on the podcast. I think you're the first person that we've interviewed that comes from like the product world. So
Hmm.
for anyone, watching this who's either a founder, maybe they're an investor, maybe, they come more from the commercial side of the business or operations, like what does a product manager do on a day-to-day basis? I know this, but I don't know if like all of our listeners truly understand like what does a product manager do?
I'd be curious to hear your answer to the question, because the actual answer is it's different in many contexts, like the stage of the
Uh-huh.
company you're in, the problem you're trying to solve, the particular way product exists in comparison to other functions in the organization. So maybe instead of painting that like complex picture, I will instead tell you what I think of as like the
Okay.
fundamental job of product. You know, in companies, big or small, everybody is contributing to the product's success, like figuring out what it is, actually building it, like delivering it, right? And figuring out
Mhm.
how to sell it. Everyone touches it. Product is sort of what I think of as like the person that most holds the weight of those things being right. And if
Mhm.
they are not right, being responsible to sort of initiate the work to make them right. And so depending on, if you're a really early stage company, I personally like to invest in companies where one of the co-founders either came from a product background or is just very product in mindset, as you're
Mhm.
fundamentally trying to figure out like what is the right product, who are we selling to, who's using it, like how do we get closer and closer to that product market fit.
Mhm.
um, and that's kind of what the work is. Like it's staying really, really close to your potential customers, like going from research discovery mode to validation to okay, now execution mode.
Mhm.
And it's that on the user side as well. So I I think your job can look anything like you're sitting with potential customers or real customers all day getting that feedback. You're
Mhm.
working closely with like, users or would be users all day to get that feedback. You're working hand in hand with engineering and data science and design to actually hear that all together, invent something new, right? Out of
Mhm.
like all of that, all those perspectives and what's possible, with technology and other things today, and then actually working with them closely as they actually develop it and deliver it, and watching really closely to see what happens, learning, and then kind of going through that loop again. So I think it's really, really fun. It only works if you're a person that is happy to be multitasking, not
Mhm.
just every other hour, but maybe every other, 5 to 10 minutes throughout the
Yeah.
day. And who is really happy in a situation where you have an enormous amount of influence and responsibility.
Mhm.
But your team may only be 4 or 5 people out of an
Mhm.
organization of 100.
Yeah. So which customers or potential customers did you work closest with that really shaped like where the product ultimately moved to? Who are some of those like really influential customers that you probably spent just an incredible amount of time with that, kind of made the product what it became?
Yeah. So I don't want to, speak for who they were working with early on when I wasn't there, but certainly at the point that I joined, we spent, I would say we had an incredible customer success and sales team that stayed
Mhm.
very, very close to our customers right after the
Love
contract
that team.
was
Love
one.
that
Like
team.
they're incredible, incredible. Like
Mhm.
they did an incredible job hiring for and like training people up and like knowing how to ask the right questions and share the right information with the product
Mhm.
team. We were certainly brought into a number of those conversations, but it was really was like a really rich source of information across all of our segments. And I think,
Mhm.
of course, the larger the client, the more time we spent with them, and the bigger earfuls we received, and then had to sort of filter through. We did have particularly close partnerships with folks like CVS and ESI and others where
Mhm.
we both sold into perhaps their employee base, but we also sold on their paper and with their
Mhm.
sales team into their clients.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of collaborative design sessions, both incrementing on the product as it was today, but also just asking like where the healthcare industry was going,
Mhm.
um, to inform the product.
What were some of the successes you were most proud of in your time at Livongo/Teladoc?
Yeah. I was a couple things. I was really proud that you didn't see over time a weakening in the core value prop to people taking their time to use our products. You only saw a broadening right? So I think like we were successful in that kind of problem I teed up earlier, which is the core behavior of self-checking and getting people to do other things. Often you break the first part when you start trying to add on other things people need to do. So, really excited about that. I think that, we absolutely succeeded in helping people receive support for other chronic conditions that they were living with as, one, never perfectly integrated, I'll say, but like integrated program, far more integrated, I think, than what they would have experienced outside of Livongo or Teladoc. And I think we did, honestly, like what I'm most proud of is I think what I think a lot about now as like a investor is if I think about healthcare and like the landscape of healthcare as lots of different puzzle pieces that have to fit together in a coherent way for people to access the right things at the right time, have a high quality integrated experience. Livongo existed at a time that I believe is quite different than now, where again, like we tried multiple times to sell into health systems. We had lots of capabilities for those clinicians to use the data and the insights. And, the candid reality is that the uptake was not where it could have been. We never robustly sold into health systems. We had many stories where sharing those insights made a huge difference, but it wasn't as if, 75% of our member base was successfully engaging like their physician endocrinologist and what was going on in the program. But despite the reality of where those sort of care models were and culture was in medicine at the time, which I think was the primary, and like the reimbursement, like those were the primary issues, right?
Yeah.
We still found a way and a wedge to really help people in something that was truly medical, not only wellness, which is also very important.
Yeah.
And I think that was really hard to find that in, and not only find that in, but hold that space for as long as we did and have.
Yeah, that's had to been incredibly rewarding work. So once you decided, to leave Teladoc Livongo, you joined Homeward, and there were several co-founders of that organization that you had previously worked with, Jenny, Amar, others. Kind of walk me through what caused you to choose to move on to Homeward.
Yeah, so I should say it wasn't an immediate move to Homeward. I spent almost a year. I could turn this computer around. You can see my massively overplanted, now not well taken care of garden and gazillion chickens in the yard. So I did a long sabbatical. Yeah. I think all of us needed a bit of a break after that incredible journey, whether it was 2 years or 5 like me. And so I did that. And, then Jenny and Omar were starting a company, and I joined for a few reasons in its early days. One, the problem that they continue to work on is incredibly close to my heart. Again, I grew up in rural northern Wisconsin, saw so many of the great things that existed up there in terms of infrastructure, but also where a lot of the gaps were. My family continues to live there, so I felt like I deeply understood what they were trying to fix. I also just really prized the opportunity to both work with them again, because they were both incredible leaders and close friends at Livongo, Teladoc. But they also pulled together a number of other people, right, that had been part of our core team from Livongo. So it wasn't a full getting the band back together, but it was kind of getting some key members as well as bringing in some new amazing talent and friends.
Yeah, it's like I'm a big Grateful Dead fan, and like Dead & Co. It's like similar, but there are differences.
Yeah. Who's the John Mayer of the Homeward crew? I'm a big believer actually in like kind of watching these different healthcare versions of the PayPal mafia. In fact, a colleague and I at the Vive Collective, we're doing an article and exercise right now, like finding all the different mafias and like who's gone on to found companies or work together in the future, and it's really exciting, and it's one of the things that I turn to when I sometimes think, hey, have we made the impact we all set out to, right, in the last several rounds of digital health? In some places, yes. In many places, no. We all would have liked to do more, had more of the companies work out. But it's not like those individuals then just went away. Like I see them reforming and building back smarter and stronger in the next round. And so I'm really excited about this next tranche of companies in digital health.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Walk me through when you joined Homeward. It was a hell of a lot earlier in the life cycle than when you joined Livongo, if I'm not mistaken. So walk me through how different it was to come in and like really build the first product, and doing some of those first things with hiring teams and all that it takes to really get a company off the ground.
Sure. And so I should say I was there for a year, right? So
Mhm.
I was there for the first year of their journey,
Mhm.
and I should definitely try to get Jenny or Mar on your podcast in the
Oh,
future to get
no,
into the real nitty gritty details of things that they
they'd
can
be
speak to
amazing guests.
voters. Yeah. Um, so I have worked in product roles before where you were coming into a tiny team with
Mhm.
barely a product or no product, just a blank sheet of paper. So that was not an unfamiliar situation for me to be in. And
Yeah.
even, Livongo and Teladoc, like we did have to go back to first principles and ask ourselves things like, okay, let's not pretend all the things relevant for diabetes are also going to be true for chronic kidney disease. Like, who are these people? What are their needs? What are the appropriate care models? Like, why will customers buy? And so just, across the board for both myself and people who'd worked in those environments with me, Amar and Jenny, of
Mhm.
course, but, also their COO at the time, Bimal Shah, like he was a really close collaborator
Mhm.
um, of ours at Livongo, leading the clinical strategy and operations team. And so, again, the band coming back together, it
Mhm.
was back to those first principles, right? Like, how has the market changed? How would people pay for us to really provide access to quality primary care in these communities? And think about it not just from the motions of doing the work and billing fee for service, but like really being held accountable for the outcomes and experience we provide across whole populations. Um, one of the things I didn't mention, but it's true that drew me to both Livongo and Homeward was real intention in picking a problem that had a business model that tried to align your incentives much more closely with what was best for your members and your patients.
Mhm.
you know, at Livongo, now it's like, of course, everybody's selling PM and making performance guarantees and all the things. That was not widespread at the time, right? Like that was an explicit decision,
That
like
is
to get
the
paid based on
Livongo
performance.
playbook that other people run. And it was a brilliant way to really, model it. And it's worked well for many others.
Yeah. But so I would say, at Livongo that was true. At Homeward, that's definitely true. I think the thing that was the biggest difference at Homeward is there's such an enormous amount of local market and community context
Mhm.
required to, build brand awareness, figure out what the product should even be, because you're inherently going into a situation where it's not that there were no primary care providers or specialists in hospital
Mhm.
systems, there just wasn't enough,
Yeah.
right? And so you couldn't just sort of like take a virtual primary care and in-person visit practice model and plop it in and have it fit perfectly.
Mhm.
There was a lot of figuring out how you were an effective partner to those who are already there, so you're augmenting their work, not displacing them, right, and making the
Yeah.
situation worse. But I mean, I loved it, right? Like it meant that we were doing things like going to holiday parades and like driving floats and sitting and like running coloring book booths. And, for me, who again like
The
came from the
Americana,
regions,
when you think
I
about
loved it. I
it.
loved it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. And for those who don't know, I don't think anyone watching this doesn't know who Livongo or Teladoc is, but from a Homeward perspective, tell me if I'm incorrect, but the goal of that organization is to help people who have cardiac issues manage their conditions, specifically in remote communities. Is that the general gist?
So, yes, and it's not solely cardiac.
Okay.
What you think about it is people in these communities who have inadequate partial or completely no access to really high quality proactive primary care
Hmm.
for all kinds of reasons. It could be because they can't actually leave their home to go access it in person, and some of the more
Hmm.
kind of hybrid or virtual models don't yet exist where they live. Or it could be because the existing primary care infrastructure is just not large enough, right, for the population size and how it's distributed. And so people aren't getting it, or they're not getting it fast enough, or not quite the right thing. And on the kind of client side, you have these plans trying to come in and
Hmm.
serve these people as beneficiaries. And if there's no primary care in the region, much less sort of somebody coordinating this subspecialty care, it's very difficult to keep those individuals on as members, much less keep them on in such a way that doesn't threaten your actuarial model. And so it really was like a really nice alignment of incentives where we came in and said, we will build a model that really cares for people living in these like, more distributed areas without the typical healthcare infrastructure to leverage. And, we'll commit to you that we're going to do a good job managing cost and outcomes in this population, kind of whatever it takes, whether it's going physically to their home, our mobile clinic, virtual services, or really figuring out how to support, the physicians already in the community to do their work even better.
That's great. Walk me through, you were extremely successful in the vendor world, whether it be at Validic, Livongo, Homeward, and then you decided to become a VC and join the Vive Collective. Kind of walk through, what precipitated that choice and how's it going so far?
Yeah. So, it was kind of the classic combo of like, the team and what they were trying to do, as well as something that I was searching for. I've been doing product work for like 15 to 20 years, depending on if you count stuff prior to medical school as well. Yeah. And it was, because of having been on that journey at Livongo across all of the stages of a company's life cycle, as well as at a much larger company, right, that was public, Teladoc. Livongo was also public, but Teladoc too. I just felt like I'd seen a lot and gotten to the point in my kind of product career where the size of the things that I was responsible for was equivalent to many of the smaller companies just getting started. And a lot of the things that I learned, not just in product, but being in those environments and sort of shepherding these products with hundreds of thousands, if not more, users. I thought there was a lot I could do to sort of help other builders, especially those in the like very early and growth phases of their company journey. And so it was around that time that I met Cheryl and Hillary, the founders of the Vive Collective. And, they had still pretty early days. The firm is about 2 years old now. But their vision was really to help bring in people who were experienced in company building or in all the other facets of healthcare that are critical to understand to build great companies, and pull them in really close to the founders and companies that they invested in. And so that idea just really resonated with me, sort of saw it as an opportunity to both learn to be a great investor, which is a really different way of thinking about companies, but also to continue, both directly and by helping to form what we call that collective of individuals, help surround the builders with other builders and experts that can de-risk and accelerate their journey.
It's obvious to me, but, for our listeners, why would being, really strong product mind and also having a clinical background really, be beneficial when being a venture capitalist and an investor? Like, how do you leverage your skills, to provide value to your firm and even more so value to the investments, that you make?
Sure. Well, I'd say in the early days, kind of alluded to this earlier, one of the reasons that I really like to look at companies where one of the founders is very product minded or comes from product is so much of what the entirety of the problem you're trying to solve for is find product market fit before you run out of money, right? Or like get close enough to it. And finding that and keeping it, because it's not like it's a gate you pass through and then you're sort of there, right? You're constantly losing it and refining it, even in later stage companies, is the core of your job. And so I think in all of the same ways that I would lead my team and look for them sort of asking the right questions, de-risking things in sort of fast and cheap ways instead of building things and throwing it out there. And then 6 months later, it's like, nobody's buying it or using it. Yep. All of those things are so deeply relevant to evaluating founders themselves and asking the right questions about the early stage companies. And, if you've been a product person or, any operator that sort of like the intersections of many things, even in growth or later stage companies, you're also really well suited to ask the right questions and smell when something's off, even in the growth companies. Yeah. And so I've been really happy to see that those things have translated so well. I also think that thinking about it in that way and all the things you can do to support companies as well is a really excellent complement to people that come from more sort of purist financial investor backgrounds, and even people that perhaps like founded a company but never had a role beyond being at the top. Yep. I find this debate, like, oh, should your VC have been a former founder or an operator or a finance person, like, completely stupid. I think what you ideally want is actually a firm that, like, has all three legs of the stool, because I mean, fundamentally, the job of an operator is to, like, help enable a person who has a vision to, like, build towards the vision. And, like, that's a lot of what your job is, right? As a VC, it's both, like, picking the people that you want to put your money behind. If you're an operator, it's who you want to put your time behind, right? And then helping make that successful. So that's sort of the product side of it. On the medical doctor side of it, I would say day-to-day as an investor, it more so helps me ask the right initial questions and look for the right level of evidence. But even more so, I know who to go to dig deeper.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gotten past the point in these areas where it's like, I'm not dangerous because I think I know everything. Like, I know how much I don't know. And that's sort of like a nice place to coexist with it. Like, you can get started, but and then you then need to bring in, like, the real experts. And that doesn't necessarily mean, sometimes it means a physician who's written the 25, academic papers that are passed around, right, in the industry. Sometimes it means just going to, like, a front line therapist and better understanding what their workflow looks like, right? And that fluidity of, like, pinpointing who and when and what questions they can actually answer well and what are actually going to be beyond the scope of what they know well is equally important.
Yeah, over the last handful of years, we've just worked with a handful of just amazing VCs. And what I've learned, and that what I think a lot of people don't really think about, is most people think, oh yeah, the best VCs just choose the best companies. They're really good at picking winners, which is true. That is part of the job. But the other part is, once you make the investment, allowing them to be really successful and giving them guidance, intros, like really stacking the deck in your favor, where you can provide value that helps them, reach their potential. And, it sounds like you've done a really, really good job of both sides of that fence, which is awesome.
And sometimes it's knowing when to get out of the way, right? If things are on track, you don't need to get overly involved.
Yep. So your background from a clinical standpoint is rare. Not many clinicians get into VC. Just haven't seen a ton of it. But you, Chrissy Farr, and John Slotkin all started a community called Clinicians Who VC. You have over 100 members. You have 1,000 people on the wait list. Why did you feel, with your founders, so passionate about building a group for clinicians who want to get into VC?
Sure. So it's 300 now. We're slowly trickling people in from the list, trying to ensure sort of culture stays strong. We kind of figure out. Right, this is like the nice an update for your investor. No, it's 300, we 3x. So it was recognizing that, how do I say this? There's demand from all sides for more clinicians. Again, like, using a generalist word there on purpose. Nurses, pharmacists, physicians, other people that are deeply involved in, like, kind of like the care ecosystem currently, to be more involved, not calling all the shots, but being more involved in determining who gets funded in the first place, and then helping those companies once they are funded. And I've been hearing almost since the day I decided not to continue on in clinical practice and got into doing product and, like, regulatory work for a while, desire from other clinicians, some of them to do that with all of their time, others to do it with part of their time to augment their direct clinical care, to somehow just be more involved, right? And it's, I think it feels a lot like something being done to those individuals currently, when what they actually want is to do it with others on the outside, developing these companies and with very different types of skills. That was the magic that I experienced in the highest functioning product teams, was figuring out how to bring, and I mean product like a big P, right? Not just product management, but like bringing all of those perspectives and people together and getting them to work effectively together despite the different sort of cultures and language. And I believe that is just as true when it comes to investment decisions and then supporting companies once you've invested. So the demand, was there on the clinician side for sure. We were very surprised, honestly, by like the 1,000 people that immediately reached out. And it's for sure their demand/need is there from the side of the actual companies being founded as well. When I tell people, even in my Vive work, if they're like much earlier than Vive would invest, I always say, hey, I can put you in front of this growing community. It's a mix of angels, VCs, people who are LPs and big funds, and they are 100% of the time so excited about the idea of like getting their idea in company in front of that community. So just sort of kind of was an obvious thing when we really thought about it. And it's grown without us honestly having to do all that much because of that demand from both sides.
That segues really well in our next question, because you mentioned like which stage is ideal for you at Vive. As EVP, walk us through your investment focus, or as people in the biz say, investment thesis, within digital health.
I always like it when people call things a thesis in VC. I'm like, this is a very different form of a thesis than I think anybody thinks of. Like a one pager. So Vive Collective, first of all, I will say, we're 2 years old. There's 3 of us on the investment team, 5 on the team total, plus several formal advisors. And I just clarify that to say it's really like our shared thesis, even if different members of the investment teams have areas they particularly are drawn to and are smart in. So like at the Vive level, we're really a flexible investment platform that can invest in Series A through growth and even beyond growth, using things like credit vehicles or much larger equity checks in partnership with our LP, Clearlake Capital, like a PE firm based down in Santa Monica. So, we can really play at lots of different stages, which is nice during this particular time in the market. You're not sort of stuck just in one focused area, finding a few of the companies that make sense, but can kind of look broadly. We don't do, pre-FDA molecules, things with tons of regulatory risk. And we also don't touch things that are kind of pure services with an EMR wrapped around it. We don't think there's enough leverage in that to fit the VC model, even though some of those are fantastic, deeply needed companies. But anything else in the middle is fair game for Vive.
That's great. You take a pretty active role in your investments. Can you talk to us a little bit more of like what your partnership looks like with some of your founders?
Sure. So we've made 2 investments to date. So I'm not going to give extremely concrete answers because it's sort of obvious who they are, and those are their companies, right? And I want to respect that. But I would say, it's really specific to like where the company is at in their needs. Like we are different than other firms where we don't have like a playbook that we say, look, if you take our money, you are doing things in this way, which is true. And like that exists at some of even like the really brand name firms with, some founders like or don't like. It's more, staying really, I would say it's very similar to like my management style, which was like eyes on, hands off until it's clear that hands need to be on. Right. And so for, one of our companies, we're less involved right now other than just supporting them in fundraising. They're going to be going up for a B round soon. And for the other company, we're more involved operationally because they're a bit earlier in their journey and figuring things out. And so it could be us individually on the team jumping in to help with different things. Spent a lot of time as an example with one company thinking about where different benchmarks are now at for the whole journey of, eligibility, activation, like are they staying retained, like what are the outcomes you're getting, because that's moving a bit in the market right now. But we also do tons of work pulling in both our formal advisors as well as the much larger community of folks we've curated for introductions, feedback on a product idea or existing product, help recruiting. And our chief platform officer, Hillary Frank, is one of the most impressive people I've ever met at like developing and maintaining a massive community. Like I was in like Mexico eating at a random cafe in a small town, and I met somebody who said they knew Hillary when I told them I worked at this VC fund called the Vive Collective. Like that's just sort of who she is. So it really is like a deep
degrees of Hillary. It's like Kevin Bacon.
Yes. Yes.
In the industry. It's great.
Yes.
Love that. You already mentioned that, in terms of things you look for, in founding teams, one specifically is someone who has a very, strong product focus. What else do you look for in founders? What are some of the traits?
Yeah. So I would say all of the obvious things that all VCs say in terms of like coachability, growth mindset, Do they have grit? Because like what they're about to sort of go through, even if maybe they fully don't.
Yeah, what's the secret sauce for you?
I think they're right. They're right in all those things.
Yeah.
I would say for healthcare, like digital healthcare companies specifically, I personally really want to see that they have like an understanding and humility about the complexity of the space and the problem they are about to take on. I'm probably not an investor that's going to invest in people coming out of like a totally different industry who are successful and they're like, yay, we're going to like totally, upend healthcare. And you ask them basic questions and they can't answer them. I think that some of those individuals are incredibly successful mostly because they know to ask the right questions and have the grit and the other attributes.
Yeah.
But far more of them quickly flame out and are like, this is terrible. Like I'm going back to sort of where I came from.
The person I just interviewed had that background and he was ultra successful. It's Sami Inkanen at Verta, who was at Trio before.
Yeah.
And he's like one of those exceptions to the rule that was successful in tech and then went into digital health and was super successful. But there's a long, huge graveyard of folks that, oversimplified it and just didn't do all.
And I will say two things. I will say it's not that I wouldn't invest in someone like that. It's more, have you taken the time to immerse yourself in the problem space and you're coming in with the recognition? Maybe you don't have all the answers, but like you at least know, right, that you're going to do something like very hard, like from all kinds of perspectives. That is fine, right? Like you've done the work. I think the danger actually in a lot of people during the last wave, at least, that came in from totally different like consumer tech, whatever industries, is a lot of them took a really, really long time to flame out because they were so well funded because of how successful they were. And I would actually love to see an analysis of a lot of the companies that were sort of like zombies and propped up by VC for a really, really long time, right? There's a lot of them that I think could be a good learning for everyone this next time around. So I look for that. I would also say, because I believe so strongly in the best companies being built through these partnerships between, clinicians, engineers, designers, like product, like strong commercial minds, I only would invest in founders that strongly believe that themselves. And I do think you sometimes see, not always, but sometimes see founders from certain backgrounds where they were top of the heap and whatever their profession was coming in and thinking that's how you're going to continue to build a great company, digital health company, by sort of knowing everything, calling all the shots, and everyone else is just executing on what you say. And maybe this exists in all industries, but I do see it a lot in healthcare, particularly in early companies. And that to me as a person, I want to sort of back away from and let them learn some hard lessons. And hopefully they come up the other side and understand who they need alongside them in their journey.
So I asked you specific questions around what you look for. What are the red flags you're looking to avoid?
Well, there's one. That's a big red flag.
You alluded to a couple already.
Yeah. That was both like what I look for and also red flag. I think companies that aren't doing the basic work up front that can be cheap and fast of market validation, user validation before they start, even fundraising in the first place, much less building a bunch of things. I am shocked by how often I see companies that are even like at Series A or going out to raise their B, where I ask some pretty basic questions or ask what they've done, right, in that vein, and they haven't done it. And there's like sort of no good answers for why. And it's like instead pointing to like, well, like we have these 5 contracts that are worth this, like isn't that validation? And I look deeper, I'm like, well, no, because those are from 5 different customer types sold on different value props, right? Like you're this is not what you think it is. So I definitely look for people that have like read the book, done the work, right, to understand those basic cheap steps you can do just by having conversations, just by building prototypes, just by iterating on them. And I would rather invest in a company, honestly, that had done an incredibly strong job at all of that and was very early in having contracts, like actual signed contracts, than a company like the one that I just, kind of an example I just gave where they haven't, and they've done some deals and the deals are all over the place. Like it looks nice on a spreadsheet because the revenue number is nice, but there's nothing there that's believable they can build upon repeatably moving forward.
Yeah, it might not be scalable. They might have made crazy customizations to each one, and then like every time it's like a new project as opposed to just, all right,
Yes.
let's flip it on. So
Yes.
that makes sense. Other than it's going to be extremely hard, what other advice would you give entrepreneurs starting a digital health company in this environment specifically?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much. I think don't shy away from bringing in fractional experts as early as possible
Mm-hmm.
to help you, but don't make the mistake of only hiring a bunch of extremely senior experts on the team that have been very
You,
far away of being in the weeds for some time.
you need doers in a
You need
startup.
you need both, but like
Mm-hmm.
they need to be in the right place for the stage of the company. And I'm seeing a lot of companies looking around and rightly saying, wow, there are so many experienced, amazing leaders out there. I
Mm-hmm.
can pull them in and get them, instead of saying, actually, I need the on the ground, high grit doers. And then I need all those other folks like sort of one step out in the orbit as, fractional CMO
Mm-hmm.
or fractional whatever, or like close advisor. I would strongly encourage looking at that model rather than creating massive operating
Mm-hmm.
costs and sort of management overhead early on. Um, I think what I was just talking about a minute ago, and like really doing the work up front so you can
Mm-hmm.
quickly, cheaply validate a bunch of things before you have a product out there in the wild and like the clock has sort of started on a round of funding you did. Like, please, 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 please do that. Like, do it
Yeah.
before you raise anything, because it really can be cheap now using all sorts of like tools that even somebody not technical like myself can use to sort of put
Mm-hmm.
together example products and other things. And great tools to get feedback from a lot of people that even when I was doing product were very, very hard to reach. One example, like we used a product recently that got us directly into conversations with therapists and families of children living with autism in
Mm-hmm.
days. Like that used to be like, a month long user research exercise.
Yeah.
And you'd have everyone saying, product, why is it taking so long to do this thing? And it's like, man, it's hard to find these people and recruit them. That is not the case by and large anymore. So lean in and do it. Um, and then I think, this is always true, but even more true right now, like focus, 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 and communicate with your team that focus
Mm-hmm.
every day to the point that you feel like a politician.
Yeah.
Like you're going to get so sick of hearing yourself say it, but it's incredible to me how many teams people try to like enable to do their best work and lead and not like wait to be told, but
Mm-hmm.
then don't give them the sort of clear structure to do that within. And then people sort of like spin and go all over the place. Like you do not have time, you do not have runway. There's no squishiness accepted, right? In whatever you're
Mm-hmm.
showing the next round for investors right now, like you got to hit those numbers that you set for yourselves and like really treat the team as people you're working arm in arm with, to focus on and hit those numbers.
Yeah, something you said just last question really resonated with me where you said, hey, you need some great leaders, but you also need some doers. And I think it's really important that, great leaders surround themselves with great talent. And that's when
Mm-hmm.
magic happens. So you've
Mm-hmm.
led some amazing teams that have accomplished amazing things. What do you look for when you hire, especially within a growth stage startup, that might be different than like hiring at a big Fortune,
Sure.
200 corporation?
You're saying growth, not earliest, because that's also different.
A little bit of both.
Right?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
what would you look for in the first 20 to 50 hires of a company, and what would you look in the first maybe 100 to 500?
Yeah. So really early on, I like people that embrace the full context and hairiness of like what we're trying to solve for.
Mm-hmm.
So I think early on, you're doing something really hard, but inherently quite focused, right? In terms of what you're trying to prove out. And there's no reason why everyone in your company can't have full context for the problem, full context where you are in hitting that problem, and full context for how they can contribute to making progress.
Mm-hmm.
On somebody that has an extreme bias to action. So on that last category, how can they contribute? They're not waiting to be told with precision what those things are, right?
Mm-hmm.
They know how to effectively communicate. So it's not just like sort of doing and creates, some maybe a disaster if nobody else knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not waiting. And I think, when I say a doer, that doesn't inherently mean to me that it has to be somebody that's very early in their career as a doer, which I think is actually a big mistake people make. There are people that are incredibly experienced, including the founders themselves often, that shift very fluidly between building and leading teams and making big, like multi-year decisions, and going to rural Michigan like we did, and like setting up a stand at the local high school and like talking to the community. And you want somebody who for sure can do the latter, but the team's going to be small. Ideally they can grow with you, not just later over. So if they have some interest in becoming, or even past experience with the building of teams and leading teams, that's sort of the ideal.
And what advice would you give to someone or a team building a product in today's environment after all your learnings over the last, decade and a half?
Yeah. I think I'm going to repeat what I said earlier in the call, right? It's focus, focus, focus. Be so close to your clients and your end users. It's not even more possible than it ever was before. I do think one thing that has changed that's very exciting to me. When I first started out, not all, but like most of the companies were a lot of, it was like enterprise software to enable care teams or wellness companies. And again, I'm not using that as a dirty word, but like wellness companies, that's very, very far away from the rest of the healthcare system. And then a lot of the most recent wave was sort of companies akin to Livongo that found this like space that you could create with light interfaces with the rest of healthcare and still created tons of value. I think now, for like all kinds of reasons, there are companies being created, getting tons of traction that are really part of the fabric of what you can think of as the healthcare delivery continuum. I'm seeing companies all the time that are setting up incredibly effective referral partnerships with PCPs and specialists if what they're offering is an area with like poor access, poor quality. I think you've sent me a few of these companies actually. That's incredible. That didn't exist before, right? You're seeing more and more companies that are taking on the totality of a care model, and it's not just digital and hardware, like it's clinicians and not just sort of taking pre-existing clinician models, but designing from first principles, like how can you put these people and product and like whatever together to deliver a better version, a better, solution for the problem. So I think product has changed dramatically even during this last cycle, where you have to think about it the way your end user or client thinks about it, where it's the totality of the thing they're buying and using. Do not get yourself stuck in, we do the tech product, ClinOps organizes the people and does the care model, right? They do the hardware. Don't do that. Like that is not how your users perceive it and experience it. And you are inherently not going to be able to like really design something new if you're putting everybody in their box and then asking it to fit together.
Yep. You've been a high performer your whole career. What are some of your guiding principles that you feel, have really enabled you to have an incredible career to date and will continue to allow you to do so?
So I haven't been a high performer my whole career, but it's nice in hindsight bias to to tell the story that way.
Survivor's bias.
Right. I would say having an orientation to the problem, like falling in love with problems that you really care about solving and for who, and not getting too caught up in the tactical way that you do it. Like deciding not to continue on with medical practice was really, really hard in a bunch of like personal and larger like debt and like other ways, of course.
I'm sure there were a lot of doubters at that point. Now you've kind of proven you did the right thing.
most of them. We'll see. My parents convinced, I'm still not sure. We'll see. Yeah. But I never lost faith that it was the right hard decision and risk to take, because ultimately I cared about having the biggest impact possible in the health of like individuals and communities. And it was this sort of unique moment in time where technology was presenting this lever to do so that was really different. So fall in love with the problem and its possibilities, and don't get too wed to a particular tactic. It'll create a lot of like fluidity and willing to take risk in one's career.
Yep.
I think like hyper growth mindset and bias to action. I don't know how to teach a person those things necessarily, right?
Those are
Like
innate. You
maybe
can't. I've tried really hard.
I
in
do
my
think getting
career.
into environments where you're surrounded by people like that
Yeah.
can maybe teach it, or at least like bring it out of a person. Whereas being too long in environments where that's not the culture, right,
Mhm.
can move you in the opposite direction. And then third, it's about people at the end of the day, right? And the places where I maybe have made mistakes in jobs or career decisions was when I underinvested in relationships, both
Mhm.
on my team, across teams, or people that I met and should have done a better job, sort of maintaining with over time. The whole reason I ended up at Livongo was a person I became close friends with at ONC years earlier, right? The whole reason I ended up at Vive Collective was a product colleague at Livongo randomly bringing me up to Cheryl and Hillary as a person who might be interesting. And
Mhm.
that's really where the biggest opportunities come from. It's not really from, well, not always from combing LinkedIn, right? And
Yeah.
finding that great role posted.
That is just incredible advice. I ask everyone who joins this show, how do you practice what you preach? How do you personally participate in wellness, whether it's exercise, ways to reduce stress? Like, how do you, in a very stressful job, and say VC is probably one of the more stressful jobs there is, like, how do you find balance?
Yeah. Um, well, I have 5 kids, so it also puts things in perspective when you have many children. We are a blended family, so luckily there's other co-parents in the mix, right? It's not like me on them all the time.
Yeah.
Um, Look, I am in no way perfect at this, right? And I think that actually is part of what gives me humility for what other people are going through in different ways, and like really
Mhm.
prioritizing working on their health. My husband and I have made huge changes in our diet over the last few
Mhm.
years, like really emphasizing protein and vegetables and reasonable portion sizes. It's amazing how just doing that consistently makes an enormous difference in one sort of health. Finding exercise and movement that fits into your life where you can reasonably prioritize that you love doing. Um, Meditation, like I've really worked to develop a practice there that has made a huge difference for me. Um,
Mhm.
and category 4, is weird as it is, like I have my own like memento mori up on the wall here in the office, and just reminding myself that like we are a speck on a speck on a speck, and
Yeah.
to not take yourself too seriously,
Yeah.
because there's many layers of like people and things that have come before us, like under the floorboards that I'm standing on right now, and it's amazing how much of the stress that relieves when you just focus on being present and doing the best work you can in what is ultimately like a pretty short period of time.
Yeah. And you're at a standing desk currently, correct?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good, tip. I think a lot of the guiding principles for health you just shared, there's so many things you shared that are similar to the Netflix documentary Living to 100. If you haven't
Mm,
seen it, it is incredible.
okay.
Really good, and like a lot of what you just shared is like sprinkled into those 4 episodes. So recommend anyone watching or listening. And then the last question you did mention, like, hey, you've maybe changed some of the things you've been eating over the last couple of years with your family. What are some like healthy recipes or specific things you did that have helped you that other folks watching and listening that are trying to improve their health might want to follow suit with?
Ooh. So I will own that we recently shifted into making fewer meals ourselves, at least during the work week, to
Okay.
finding great delivery services, Sunbasket being the one we most often use,
Mm-hmm.
where they're very close to needing only 10 minutes of prep or just heating up. And that was actually hard for me because cooking meals is one of the ways that I show love for my family. But
Same.
I think it was just an acknowledgement that for the moment that we're in, I needed to like simplify, make it easy,
Mm-hmm.
and still do like make healthy choices within those services. So we consistently pick meals that are a healthy protein, and then primarily vegetables around it with like a minority of like healthy grains.
Yeah.
When we cook on the weekends, it really follows that model. Um, one of the reasons I have a huge garden was not just stress relief after Livongo Teladoc, but also because like we eat from it most days. We live
Yeah.
in San Francisco, California, so luckily we can use it the whole year. We have a whole bunch of chickens that luckily have been quiet this morning because we've been recording. So we eat a lot that is very, very, very kind of local, homegrown, but eat a lot from farmers markets as well. And I think just generally, like, you can make very simple meals using foods that need to be only very lightly prepared if you figure out how to access high quality items. Like,
That's great. Yeah, the centurions that were on this documentary, the majority of them had their own gardens. So they were eating like really
mm,
nutritious food. And also like that's very light exercise, picking
mhm,
weeds and bending over. And there was like a really strong correlation between like balance and longevity.
mm.
So I think like that strength and all those things were huge factors. Well, again, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy this. Thank you for the stepping into the ring with me on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. And again, congrats on all your success, and really excited to see what you're able to accomplish at Vive. So we'll have to do a follow up in a couple of years with how some of these investments did.
Great. Would love to. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.